Good afternoon to you, and thank you so much for finding time to be with me this afternoon. The show is Diaspora Dispatches, and as I mentioned there yesterday, we did have some change of the programming, so I'll not be bringing you the latest news from the continent of Africa, as I already did that earlier on in our morning show. So right now, we shall be looking at South Sudan, and if you watch us, you know we talk so much about South Sudan, and not just South Sudan but other countries as well across the continent of Africa, because we are a Pan-African news television station, and so we look at countries across the continent. So that is our business. My name is Miriam Ogutu, in case you're wondering, and thank you so much for joining us, and a very good afternoon, good morning, good evening, depending on where you are joining us from. So we talk so much about South Sudan, and every now and then we mention the revitalized peace agreement that was signed in South Sudan in September. I think in just a couple of days it will be in 2018. It will be adding another year to that. It was signed on the 12th of September 2018. So that is what we keep referring to a lot of times, that we, when we're having conversations around South Sudan and its peace process. But that dates back, the peace process dates back just after South Sudan got its independence, and thereafter, 2 years later, the country plunged into chaos, and so sometimes we don't get exactly what happened for South Sudan to be where it is today. So today I shall be looking at I shall be bringing us a bit of a history on South Sudan, especially on this peace process and where South Sudan is today and why. And maybe after the facts, then you can decide whether a lot of this have been achieved or not. And if not, why is the peace process in South Sudan elusive? That is what we shall be looking at today. So just a bit of a background on South Sudan. Of course, it got its independence in July 2011, following a long-awaited referendum on self-determination. 2 years later, a political crisis within its ruling party boiled over, exposing weak institutions and deep historical divisions among South Sudanese communities. And remember, at this time, 2 years into their independence, South Sudan had not really even laid the groundwork, laid the foundations for even any strong institution. It was still coming to itself. The people were still coming to themselves in their own country. And remember, this followed many years of bloody war, when they were fighting with Greater Sudan for them to be allowed to leave, events that followed the referendum. So they had so much still to look at, and so much still to reconcile with. And so just as they were trying to get a hold of this new country in the world, the war broke up 2 years just after getting its independence. Although it began as an elite political spat, the conflict quickly assumed an ethnic character, and that has become a real problem, not just in South Sudan, but also we see it play here in Kenya, and we see that play across in a lot of political divisions that we see play out in the continent of Africa. And while a host of complex historic political dynamics contributed to the crisis, of course, President Salva Kiir, whose ethnicity is Dinka, and Vice President Riek Machar, who comes from Nuer, became the faces of South Sudan became the faces of New Sudan after the death of Garang. The latter was accused of an attempted coup d'etat and fled Juba. Machar was accused of a coup d'etat, so he fled Juba, although there was no evidence to support the allegation, and it was widely dismissed by the international community. After violence targeted killings in Juba, the conflict spread across the country. So the National Army collapsed, and various constituencies took up arms as part of a constellation of anti-government and largely ethnic Nuer forces under Machar's coordination. South Sudan's neighboring states, Kenya included, and the wider international community were shocked indeed, moving quickly to try to prevent the collapse, and they have been doing so since then. The South Sudan peace process thus materialized under the auspices of the regional organization called the Intergovernmental Authority on Development, that is IGAD, has been the mediator, the spearheader in this peace process, with the dual aims of ending the war and facilitating the dialogue towards a post-conflict political transition immediately after this war broke. So the IGAD Mediation for South Sudan was appointed by the IGAD Assembly of Heads of State and Government in December 2013 to facilitate a ceasefire, negotiations, and mediate an inclusive dialogue towards a sustainable peace. The three mediators were appointed representing Ethiopia and Kenya. We had Lazaro Sumbeyo and retired General and mediator of South Sudan. And we also did have one mediator from Sudan, Mohammed Al-Dabi, a retired general. So we did have representatives from Ethiopia, Kenya, and Sudan. Together with Uganda, these four states were most influential participants in the South Sudan crisis and IGAD peace process. The mediators reported directly and solely to IGAD heads of state. The heads of state reinstated considerable decision-making authority over the mediation and thus the direction of the process. So IGAD has been very instrumental as far as the peace process in South Sudan. And I think when we are caught up in all these things happening in South Sudan, sometimes we get lost and we don't remember really. But it is IGAD that actually initiated the first mediation process after, the war broke out in South Sudan in 2013. IGAD's leading role in the peace process endorsed by the African Union and the United Nations Security Council, as well as the United States, China, and the other peace process supporters. So all these players came to support this effort by IGAD. All right, so a technical secretariat to support the work of the mediators was established over the course of 2014, and its peak comprised more than 20 staff members, almost of whom came from the IGAD member states. That was expected. And in addition to administrative support, the Secretariat provided political and thematic advice and helped in designing the process, drafted documents and proposals and supported the parties to the peace process during the negotiations. I just want us to understand what culminated to what we have today of the revitalized peace agreement, and we are getting into that just a little bit. And then after that, perhaps I'll just take us through just an overview, because it's a very detailed agreement of what really that comprises. When you sit here and we talk about the revitalized peace agreement and how a lot of the factors in there are not being implemented, and the problem with that, and how that has impacted on having a peaceful South Sudan, a lot of people don't really understand what is in the revitalized peace agreement. So today I'll do us a favor and I'll just take us quickly through that so that we have a better understanding, even as we look at the latest developments as far as this peace process is concerned in South Sudan. So the IGAD peace process began in January 2014. Remember, the war broke up in 2013 and formally concluded in August 2015. With the signing of the agreement on the resolution of the conflict in South Sudan. So this was the first agreement signed after the war broke in 2015. And although the IGAD mediators continued to engage in a post-agreement talks, because after the signing of that agreement, and how we've seen even that play out in the 2018 signing, then the leadership of South Sudan have shown that somebody still has to follow after them to see that they're able to implement, that agreement, because we can only help you in drafting, in putting things in order. But at the end of the day, the government and the people of South Sudan have the responsibility of implementing. And, will not hold the people of South Sudan accountable to this, because what can they do? So the responsibility lies with the people up there. And so even after signing this, the IGAD mediators had to stay and to ensure that there was a post-agreement talks until November 2015, because, the leaders in South Sudan, one thing I've noted, they're very egocentric. If it's not going my way, if it's not what I want, then I don't want to hear what you have to say. We've seen that come from Machar, sometimes Dr. Machar, and we've seen that come from, President Salva Kiir. He's just sitting there thinking, I'm also the president of this country, which is true. And so I do have certain rights, which the rest of you don't have. So I might make some decisions. And you just go along with that. And we've seen that pull and push, and not just these two, but all other, stakeholders in this process that make up the leadership of South Sudan. So we've seen that the ego playing out in ways that has become detrimental to the country of South Sudan, and this cuts across board. And so they had to stay, and talks were convened at various locations in Addis Ababa, as well as in Bahir Dar and Debre Zeit. The IGAD mediation and other partners also undertook extensive shuttle diplomacy in South Sudan and to key regional capitals, and I think Nairobi is right in there. Now, the mediation was led, which led to the 2015 ARCSS. Okay, that is the Agreement on the Resolution of the Conflict in South Sudan. RCSS was divided into 3 phases. First one, beginning in December 2013, was primarily preparatory and focused on setting the agenda for the talks. Okay, so all right, we're having a problem and we need all of you to sit and have a talk. So what do you think is the issue, and how can we include it on the table? This other side, what do you think is the problem, and how can we talk about it? So that was the first phase of the process, to just bring the issue and focus on setting the agenda for the talks by gathering whatever information and whatever issues that that was being raised by the different players in South Sudan. So, and then phase 2. Oh no, before we get to phase 2, all right, so while they were setting the agenda for the talks, designing modalities and rules of procedure, securing a cessation of hostilities agreement. This was in phase 1 in 2013. Before they got into 2015 drafting this ARCSS and negotiating the release of the detained SPLM leaders. And then phase 2, which began in February 2014, focused on a more wide-ranging substantive agenda and continued until the following November, and phase 3, which attempted to overcome the difficulties outstanding at the phase 2, began in December 2014 and continued until March 2015, following the deadlock in talks in March 2015. The IGAD mediation was reconfigured in June 2015 as IGAD Plus. Look at that. A hybrid of IGAD, because now that one could not really sort out their issues. So I think it was IGAD plus other members, and I think that is where the Deputy President of South Africa come in, I think, because they had to bring in other voices from outside of the IGAD's jurisdiction. Following the signing of the ARCSS in August 2015, IGAD held a number of further meetings to address issues regarding implementation of the agreement. And in late October 2015, the Joint Monitoring and Evaluation Commission was formed as the body mandated by the peace agreement to oversee its implementation, and formally became operational in November 2015. Now, JMEC was led by a chairman and supporting secretariat, and its membership included South Sudanese stakeholders, the members of IGAD Plus, and of course other donors. And following the collapse of 2015 ARCSS, a new round. So after they agreed and they signed that agreement in 2015, the Agreement on the Resolution of the Conflict in South Sudan, the ARCSS, that collapsed. All right, they had agreed and then somehow they disagreed. So a new round of IGAD-led peace talks was convened in 2017. Okay. It has been a long road. So was convened in 2017. These talks were known as the High-Level Revitalization Forum. And this timeline and archive, however, are limited, what I've just explained to you. Now, during that time, let's look at who were the financiers of this peace process, because funding has been a major issue as far as implementation even of the current peace process is concerned. So that first round of talks in that IGAD process that started in 2015, the agreement collapsed. And then another one started in 2017. But let's look at that happened. That started in 2013 to 2015. The process was financed and supported in kind by international partners. Funding for the negotiations, the mediation and secretariat, travel and accommodation, and the ceasefire monitoring mechanism was provided for by China, Denmark, the EU, Italy, Japan, the Netherlands, Norway, Sweden, the United Kingdom, and the United States, and administered through the IGAD Secretariat. Okay, so that is just a background that started the mediation process that started just after the war in 2013. So after that now, remember, as I said, the mediation, the agreement, the ARCSS, the first one failed. It was agreed on 2015, and then by later on towards the year ending, they had already, collapsed. It had already collapsed. So all those years that IGAD had put into it amounted to nothing. Okay. So the first process was between 2013 to 2015, and then there was another peace talks that IGAD-led peace talks that was convened in 2017. So that is what I want us to look at, because every time we look at the peace process in Sudan, that is usually when I talk about it, or when you talk about it here, that is usually my point of reference a lot of times, because it is this agreement that is currently holding, and that the leaders of South Sudan are mandated to see fully the implementation of this. And this has been faced with a lot of challenges, and so let me just, in a nutshell, very quickly, just bring us up to date with even this how went through. Now, the process leading up to the signing of now what we call the Revitalized Peace Agreement on the resolution of the conflict in Republic of South Sudan, ARCSS. Remember, the other one was ARCSS, but this one is R, representing the revitalized, because now they had to look at the agreement that they had initially have, and see what it is that was lacking, or what it is that other players maybe never felt was represented that they wanted in there, and how they make it more comprehensive, so that they just build on that, and so that they move forward as a country. So they just added the revitalized, so it was just a building on the initial agreement that was agreed upon that collapsed in 2015. Are we together? It's too much. Okay. Now, the process, as I said, involved a significant pressure put on the two main parties to the conflict, the Sudan People's Liberation Movement. These are the key players, SPLM, and the Sudan People's Liberation Movement in opposition, SPLM-IO. So the first one is led by President Salva Kiir, and the other one in opposition is led by Dr. Riek Machar, who also happens to be the first vice president of the Republic of South Sudan. And in case you don't know, South Sudan has 5 vice presidents. I think the first vice president is more senior in regards to seniority of office. I don't know, and then the rest follows. But, he leads the pack in the vice presidency. They have 5, but Dr. Riek Machar is the first vice president. So the two peace negotiators in this other one, Sudan's President Omar al-Bashir, the former president, and Uganda's President Yoweri Museveni, possessed significant leverage over the main actors and used this to force an agreement. So they had to be coerced. I'm telling you, the peace process in South Sudan has not been the easiest, because you're dealing with people who are highly opinionated, and they believe so much in whatever position they hold that they're never willing to listen to the other side and reach a compromise. And on top of that, yes, they're very much egocentric. And on top of that, they're power hungry. And on top of that, they're selfish. So you try negotiating with people like that and see how much far you can get with them. It's just what, and that is just my personal opinion, but that is what I've been, observing. And it's all of them. Really, it is. And so they had to be coerced. They had to be coerced. Museveni and Bashir had to tell, and the other players had to tell them, now look here, we're not going to keep doing this, going into these musical chairs all the time. You have a country to lead. You have people who are looking up to you. You go ahead and do the right thing by your people. All right, I'm imagining that is, but probably those are not the words they used. Okay, now the negotiation process was thus not characterized by inclusiveness, but rather this nuance by Museveni and Bashir. So not everybody was included in this, but rather by pragmatic. So maybe this is why we still have some holdout groups, like those ones read by Thomas Cirillo, that still feel like they were left out. And that is true. That is something that they have expressed, because Museveni and Bashir and perhaps other players are not really interested in these others, because these were the two major players. And so these are the people who are coerced into getting into these talks. And so they were not characterized by inclusiveness. Other people are not really included in this. Other players who are also important in this in this matter. So by rather pragmatic considerations, such as to how effectively hold the widespread violence and suffering that was continuing. So those are the factors also they were looking at. People are killing each other. Your army and your militants are killing that army and the people who are aligned to that other side, and this other side is also doing the same. So how can we first stop this widespread violence and suffering before we even get to other matters? And as such, it represents an interesting case in the discussion of what fairness means and how we've seen the lack of that play out, and how we see that being factored in the whole of these peace negotiations. And only, that was that. So I want us, that was a bit of a background on where we are today as far as the peace process in South Sudan is concerned, and why perhaps, considering all these factors, it has continued to be elusive. But there has been some good progress that we must appreciate that has been made as far as this peace agreement is concerned. So now let's just look at, and it was drafted under the auspices of IGAD, the Revitalized Agreement on the Resolution of the Conflict of the Republic of South Sudan, RARCSS, and it was agreed upon in Addis Ababa, Ethiopia. That is the, headquarters of the African Union, and that happened on the 12th of September 2018. So it has about 8 chapters, I believe. So I'll just take us very quickly so that we understand when we sit here and talk about why very important aspects of this peace agreement has not been implemented and what that could mean to the whole process. You might understand better exactly what we are saying. So the first chapter, Revitalized Transitional Government on National Unity, and it covers the establishment, seat and the term of the transitional government. You still have the transitional government, and from what I see happening, they just want to still be on transition. They're not keen on wanting to have elections. So having elections was very key as far as this peace agreement is concerned. So there were some terms and, conditions that were set as far as the transitional government is concerned, the mandate of the transitional government, the composition of this transitional government of national unity, and the general provisions applicable during the pre-transitional period, structure of the executive and all that, okay? And of course, president, whatever he's meant to be doing, the vice president, the responsibilities, other vice presidents. So that is the first chapter that is dealing with that. I think just the leadership and the decision-making and consultation procedures in the executive and the council of ministers and how they're supposed to be appointed, the deputy ministers, and all of that was spelled out. It was like a mini constitution. start with this. See how you organize yourself. So it was clearly spelled out. And then it also addresses the issue of number and boundaries of states. Boundaries of states. This was also a thing. I will not get into it. Remember when they keep changing? Riek Machar wanted a certain number, and the side of Salva Kiir even wanted about 42 states. Remember when we were having that conversation? The boundaries and states was really a thing, but they were able to solve that. Okay? We had that conversations sometimes back, so I will not get into the issue, but I think part of that was already sorted. Remember, and I see you commenting, and I'll get through your comments in a short period of time. I just want our viewers to understand when we sit here and talk about the peace process in South Sudan and the revitalized peace agreement of 2018, what does that mean? So I started by taking us all the way from when South Sudan became independent, and when the war broke 2 years after its independence in 2013, and when IGAD quickly started the mediation process in 2013, and they set up the first mediation in 2014. And so when that process started between 2013 to 2015, when they agreed on the ARCSS, and then it collapsed later on, before they had the ARCSS, the revitalized. This one now we are looking at, whose process started in 2017. Only then can we fully understand the importance, even when you see that now the army, the unified forces were able to graduate sometimes back last week and all that, you'll appreciate, the importance of all this as far as having a stable South Sudan is concerned. So that is just chapter 1. So the second chapter, as I told you, the revitalized peace agreement, has about 8 chapters, and the second chapter is the permanent ceasefire and transitional security arrangements. So the first one being on the permanent ceasefire, it is spelled out. It's a whole thing. So I can't go detail to detail, but if you're interested, you can go look for it so that you're able to know exactly what is contained there. And then the pre-transitional period, the transitional period, mechanisms of security arrangements, and strategic defense and security review board. And then the third one, the humanitarian assistance and reconstruction, agreement principles for humanitarian assistance and reconstruction, and special reconstruction fund to help the people of South Sudan and the country rebuild itself. So they're far from doing that, because that second chapter is very important. That has to do with the transitional period and the security arrangement. And I think the unified forces falls into that. So they need to get that clearly before they can even start thinking about the reconstruction. Of course, the humanitarian assistance is ongoing, but the things that has to be done after the people have returned to their homes, which and security is guaranteed. And that's why the graduation of the unified forces is a very crucial aspect of the peace process, and we are grateful that that has been able to be done. So far, I think they're settling in. So we just give it time, and then we see how the country will stabilize. The chapter 4 of the revitalized peace agreement focused on resource, economic, and financial management. Now, this is a whole new conversation that I can't even start having with you today, because as it is today, South Sudan has no proper structures in place for accountability as far as their resources is concerned, their economy is concerned, and financial management is concerned. So that is a big problem. And the drafters of this peace agreement noted even at that time. So it was included. So this has to happen. And there were general principles that were spelled out in this agreement, and one of them was to have institutional reforms and see how they can have Ministry of Finance and Planning and Anti-Corruption Commission and things like that. Just institutions that can help as far as accountability is concerned. So, and of course, the issue to do with wealth sharing and revenue allocation, public expenditure, and things like that, that we've seen has also become a source of insecurity because these issues have not been addressed. Okay? So Chapter 5 of the revitalized peace agreement was the transitional justice, or is there? It's not was. is. So these are things that are still expected to be implemented in South Sudan. Transitional justice and accountability, reconciliation and healing. Now this is the part I'm waiting for personally. Because after you've done all of that, having in mind what the people of South Sudan have gone through and what the country have gone through, somebody has to be accountable. And part of that, because I think this is something they keep playing around with, nobody really wants to address this matter very straightforward. There cannot be healing unless and reconciliation unless people have seen that justice and accountability, very important key factors. You can't talk to people about reconciliation and healing and you close your eyes as far as justice and accountability is concerned. These whole things must go together. So that code that was supposed, the hybrid code that they've been running away from, I don't know if it will be a solution, but we've seen how those special codes, like the one that was formed in Rwanda, the one that was formed in South Africa after to sort out the issue of apartheid, and some of it was formed in Burundi after the clashes. In the morning I was talking to you in our earlier shows and I was telling you Burundi really has had numerous coups, I know, numerous, and even right now there is some sense of uneasiness. And even just the other day, the president Evariste Ndayishimiye fired his prime minister because he's suspecting some government officials are organizing a coup, which will not be a surprise because Burundi is really a very fertile ground for that because of some historic factors that I will not get into that right now because we are looking at South Sudan. But I'm just saying there has to be some level of justice and accountability for there to be true reconciliation and healing. That has to happen. And so there were agreed principles for transitional justice and Commission for Truth and Reconciliation and Healing. That has not yet been formed. Why not? Because that is something you can do. President Salva Kiir and other stakeholders, that does not require a lot of money. I know funding is an issue. And of course the hybrid court for South Sudan and rights of victims and witnesses and all this. But it's just a ping pong as far as this aspect is concerned. And I think this is the core of everything. If you don't deal with this properly, then you can never truly move forward as a country. That is just my personal belief. So justice and accountability is important for reconciliation and healing to happen. So that is in Chapter 5 of the Revitalized Peace Agreement. Now, Chapter 6 spelled out the parameters of permanent constitution. After all this is said and done, South Sudan needs a constitution. I don't think, because right now they're operating within the parameters of the Revitalized Peace Agreement. South Sudan does not have a permanent constitution because constitution making is a process. So they've not come to a place where they're able to actually sit down as a country and as a people and decide, okay, so what kind of a constitution do we want and what? Because this is a constitution is an agreement between the government and its people. So the people must be involved in this process. And South Sudan has not had that pleasure to where things are just come and now let's have a constitution. They have not had that yet. So that is contained in Chapter 6 of this, and Chapter 7, the Joint Monitoring and Evaluation Commission, and then Chapter 8, the supremacy of this agreement and procedures for amendment of the agreement. So they're saying in case anything else has to change, then this is how you have to change, and amend some of these things that are spelled out in the Revitalized Peace Agreement. So that is what the agreement contains. And there was a report that I was talking to you about here yesterday, the latest reports on South Sudan by the United Nations. Even as fighting continues, there's some sense of renewed fighting in South Sudan. A new report released on Tuesday documents about 173 civilians' deaths over a 4-month period, along with widespread human rights violations committed without repercussions. And I think there's a point I was reading in that story that really disturbed me. A lot of rape cases happened and things like that, and a young 9-year-old was gang raped. The worst thing that can possibly happen. So the violations were committed during clashes between the joint government forces and affiliated armed militia groups on one hand, and elements of Sudan's People Liberation Movement, army in opposition, loyal to former Vice President Sheikh Machar on the other, so both sides. And the report, which covers the period between 11th of February to 30th May, is based on 2 verification missions conducted by UNIMIS in the 3 counties of Koj, Leah and Mayandit, as well as the neighboring areas. So if you want, that report is on the United Nations website, so you can find it there and you can read it for yourself. It's really appalling. It's really appalling. So when you read things like this, you understand why some of these things were actually spelled out in the Revitalized Peace Agreement, and why it is absolutely important that these leaders actually see to it that they get to implement the aspect of this peace agreement. Tut Quick Lodge, thank you so much for watching. And Charles Munga, it's always a pleasure. And Michael Losowa, you're saying good afternoon. Good afternoon to you too. And you're watching from Western Australia, Perth. And you're saying our people in South Sudan deserve better than what our people in South Sudan deserve better than what they are in the moment. No any services at all. Can you imagine those in public offices not getting payment in time, 3 months and more, but they still are going to work regularly without any complaints? This government will not bring peace very soon, and that is sad. It's only our people who are the one paying the price. Most of those in the governments have nice houses. Yes, in neighboring countries. That is true. So many of them even have now nice houses in the leafy suburbs of Nairobi, just here, and all the money goes to their pockets, and also there is no accountability. And part of it, the transitional government of national unity, it was just supposed to be there as a caretaker government for a period of time. But from what we've been seeing playing out, them not wanting to have elections and keep postponing the dates of elections, it is saddening. It is saddening, and there's no will there. There's no will to change. There's no will to do better. There's no will to want to do right by the people of South Sudan. There's no will. There's no will. They get to implement this peace process at their own pace and aspects of it when they feel it's important. There's no will at all. So they want to maintain the status quo. Even in 2024, that's where they have postponed the elections to 2024 in December. I'm telling you, if you're still talking about the same matter, and if you're still here, and 2024 will come and will go, and we will not see an election in South Sudan. I can almost guarantee you that, unless we see a lot of coercion from the partners, because that is the language they understand, and sanctions and things like that. They understand force. That is the language they understand. And then maybe, just maybe, we might see moving forward as far as that aspect of the Revitalized Peace Agreement is concerned. So I totally agree and hear what you're saying, Michael Losowa. Thank you so much, all of you, for your time this afternoon. This has been Diaspora Dispatches, and today we have been paying a special attention on South Sudan's peace process, and just looking at the background of those peace processes. That started as they started, collapsed as they went, dates kept being pushed forward. And that was that. Many years later, we are almost the same place that we were in South Sudan many years back. So as much as things seems to be changing, but a lot still remains the same. So hopefully there will come a time where they can fully implement at least majority of what is important in that revitalized peace agreement, so that they are able to have their own constitution, a proper one, and see how they can ground themselves as a country for the prosperity of the country of South Sudan. Thank you so much for watching this afternoon. My name is Miriam Ogoto. It has been a pleasure. I'll see you tomorrow, God willing. Bye-bye for now.